what I would love to know first is if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this work, and also a little bit about Portsmouth Humane Society.
Sure. My name is Alison Fechino. I am the executive director at Portsmouth Humane Society. I've been in sheltering for about 7 years. Like every kid that loves animals, when I was younger, I wanted to grow up and be a veterinarian. And then I learned how much veterinary school costs. So I decided to take a beat after I graduated from college and make sure it was really what I was interested in before I threw all of that money at it.
Yeah.
And I got a job in a shelter. I loved it. And I didn't look back from there. So I've held positions in operations, in event management, fundraising, and then now as the executive director, I'm responsible for program oversight at the Portsmouth Humane Society. Our shelter is a nonprofit, but we hold a municipal contract to provide sheltering services for the city of Portsmouth. Our annual intake is between 12 and 1,800 animals. This past year, it was a little bit on the low side due to COVID and some of the changes that we made to adjust to the pandemic. We primarily take in dogs and cats, the occasional small animal, and very, very rarely livestock. We don't really have the facilities to house them. So when we do take them in, it's like an overnight housing kind of thing.
Yeah. Awesome. So my introduction, I think, to Portsmouth Humane Society was that Heartspeak was doing a workshop in that area of Virginia. I think it was in 2019 now. I've lost
It was pretty recently, yeah.
Yeah, I've lost all track of dates because of this past year.
As one does.
Yeah. But I met a few of your colleagues, including Diana, who I think ended up connecting us more recently because you did this amazing photo project kind of internally shooting stock images for your shelter's use. And you were amazing enough to kind of connect with Heartspeak and say, how can we make sure that other organizations are also able to use these, not just Portsmouth Humane Society. So I wanted to kind of first introduce that idea to everybody, but also get a little bit more information from you. It was honestly such an inspiring email, like just the simplicity of saying, like, we have this resource and we think it's valuable and we would love for it to be able to be shared with others, I think is something that our field has gotten so much better at over the past year. We were a little bit siloed, I would say, before 2020, and the silver lining of the pandemic is I think we've gotten in really good practice of saying, like, I have this thing and you can use it too. But I wanted to investigate with you, like, how did that come about? How did you decide that that was an important move for your organization, and just what were the logistics involved, all that good stuff?
No, I was really excited that you saw value in the project because we certainly were very passionate about it from the second it came about as an idea. I was researching marketing materials and looking through stock imagery one day just to put together some basic brochures for our organization. And I noticed that most of the stock photos I was looking at included young, cisgender Caucasian females with very model-esque figures, posing with poodles or Dalmatians or these impeccably groomed golden retrievers. And I was like, this doesn't really represent, first of all, our shelter animal population, because if you've worked in a shelter, you know that you'll see like one golden retriever in your entire career.
Right.
And second, it didn't represent the community of adopters that we have or the community that we serve. And we wanted our community members to both see themselves in our marketing materials and also feel seen and represented by our organization. And so I started looking for more targeted stock images. And when I did, I found that the pictures were not really ones that I would use or not ones that I felt represented marginalized communities in a way that wasn't like incredibly stereotypical. For example, like I'm a lesbian, so I'll use a lesbian as an example. I looked for like lesbian couple with dog, and it was like these two women in plaid flannel shirts and beanies with a Subaru and like a pit bull over their shoulder. And I was like, okay, but like, that's not every lesbian couple,
Right.
that's just how like the media tends to represent lesbians. So
Right.
I wanted to come up with images that just showed people and pets in a more natural feeling environment. And so our team reached out to members of the LGBTQ plus community, to Black, Indigenous people of color, to older individuals and men who you don't see often in shelter imagery, and paired them with pets that we currently had available for adoption to provide a more realistic representation of what the shelter population looked like. We had 3 photographers offer to assist, and they came out and set up all the photographs and did all the editing. So the results were really stunning. And we were very excited both to have those available to use for our purposes, but then also to give to other shelters who were struggling with the same issue of showcasing people from different communities in their media.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just so, I keep using the word inspired, but I'm really just really so excited about this because I think sometimes we underestimate the power of imagery in this way. Especially, I think we've all hopefully really learned from the events of 2020, and continue to learn from even more recent issues of racism and gender-based violence in this country. And I think we are sometimes in that sticky spot that you mentioned, where even if we can access stock imagery that is maybe a little bit more representative of our community, oftentimes those stock images don't have animals in them, or if they do,
Right.
they're exactly what you said, they're not necessarily representative of shelter animals. So I think that this very unique intersection of both being more inclusive of the human element but that also inclusive of the animal element is such a unique opportunity for this kind of thing. And I'm hoping that other shelters and rescues will see this and kind of go like, well, we can do this too, and hopefully we can establish maybe an industry standard of this kind of stock imagery. But I also wanted to know, how was this something that Portsmouth Humane Society was aware of before 2020, or was 2020 kind of an impetus to take some of these actions maybe a step further beyond conversation? Can you tell me a little bit about that kind of internal history?
Sure. I think the last few years have really highlighted, like you mentioned, issues of gender inequality, racism, bias against LGBTQ plus people. And so we had sort of taken some tentative first steps down the road to use more inclusive language and imagery, but it's just one facet of a larger push on behalf of our organization to really embrace, diversity, equity, and inclusion, both within our shelter and in the animal welfare field. To put it very simply, it's the right thing to do, but dismantling and calling out systems that oppress marginalized groups has positive ramifications for the pets that those groups are caring for. Human and animal wellness are intrinsically linked by nature of the relationships that we have with our pets. And so therefore, animal welfare and social justice issues really go hand in hand. And you've seen the animal welfare field start to embrace that intersection between social justice and animal welfare a lot recently, which is kind of how I first became interested in it, because putting those two issues together for me represents not only my personal interest, but I think a turning point in sheltering where we can provide more holistic services to our community and the pets within it.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree with that more, and that was so well said. In terms of, you also touched a little bit on language, and I'm also so curious. I think one conversation that is sometimes missing, I hear it touched on occasionally, but is sometimes missing, I think, from some of the newer conversations around DEI and inclusion generally in our field is, and it might be because I am more on the marketing side, so I'm often having those conversations, but where we also need to see our marketing efforts and things like language and imagery intersecting with policy. So we can't be necessarily putting out one version of ourselves if then people are going to come to our facilities and their interactions are going to negate that welcoming feel if our policies and kind of programs aren't following that same line of strategy, and compassion, frankly. So I'm wondering, are there things that your shelter has been doing over the past few years to kind of make those moves as well? I saw some really amazing kind of language changes that I am noticed that I saw on your site. I was taking a look at that. So tell me a little bit about where you see that intersection with policy and marketing.
We have recently changed our staffing structure to include both a community engagement manager and a community resource manager. And those two positions are focused on creating a welcoming experience for anyone who comes to PHS. Whether you are there to adopt or there to surrender or there because you simply need help, we want to make sure that the quality of your experience and the quality of the interaction that you have with our team is the same.
Yeah.
In animal welfare, historically, my experience has been that if you are there to adopt, we're really happy to see you. And if you're there to take advantage of a service that we offer, which is to rehome your pet, we think you're a bad person. And we want to make sure that that is not the message that our organization is sending, because it doesn't do the animals any favors. And it really doesn't reflect that kind of welcoming image that, we'd like to give to the community.
Yeah.
So our community resource manager acts as a case manager for pet owners in crisis that need to surrender their pet by either facilitating intake or facilitating access to veterinary care, pet supplies, pet food, and then handling any of the associated transactions like the actual intake process. That way folks are dealing with one person and they have one face to put to the organization rather than getting bounced around and having maybe an experience that's a little bit disjointed. One of the things that my organization has done with the support of the board, which I've really appreciated, is that we have recognized the importance of speaking out in support of marginalized communities through our social media. I think we were a little tentative to voice support, for example, when Black Lives Matter was really at its peak, because we were afraid that some more conservative donors might not appreciate how that movement overlaps with animal welfare. Mm-hmm. And eventually we decided that doing the right thing and making steps forward for DEI was more important than honoring the opinions of probably a pretty small group of donors. And we felt it was important to kind of revise our mission to include advocacy for the safety, equity, and inclusion of community members in addition to animals. And we've largely been well supported by our donors and our volunteers and certainly our staff members. So I think our tentativeness was maybe a little unfounded, which was a great surprise.
Yes, I'm so happy to hear that, because I think that's another conversation that has sadly had to come up often in the past year. And I think I was so excited when I saw your social media account that your organization made a statement about the murders in Atlanta and just generally racism against the AAPI community. And I think that I've heard, versions of this conversation in a lot of different organizations, and, that fear of, well, what do we do? This is new territory for animal welfare organizations largely. And what do we do about that? And so I did see a lot of statements eventually come out supporting Black Lives Matter following the murder of George Floyd. But it has been a little bit quieter around the Atlanta situation, and I'm really moved that your organization has taken a clear stance on that. And has that been an evolving conversation internally? Is that something that the board talks about with each incident, or is it kind of accepted that this is part of the fabric of your culture at this point?
With the Black Lives Matter movement, it was definitely a conversation that we hadn't had before. And while it certainly is one that we should have had before all of those instances came to light, I was glad that we did end up having it. And it felt like we were a little behind the ball. By the time we put out a statement, so many others had as well, and it felt a little safer to do. And once the board voiced support for that, I felt a lot more comfortable with moving forward with a statement on the most recent murders in Georgia, because they had already sort of laid the groundwork for it and said, yeah, we're okay with this. And I didn't want us to wait for other people to do it, because somebody has to be first. Like, somebody has to be the first shelter in our area to make that move and pave the way or whatever. And it was so obviously the same kind of situation for us that we felt like there was no reason not to comment. And we also, we had some folks give pushback and say, well, we shouldn't be getting involved in politics. We're an animal welfare organization. But I don't believe it's political to speak out against racial violence. And if that is speaking personally, not on behalf of my organization, if you equate your politics with racism, then something is wrong with your politics. So that's kind
Yeah,
of how that came about.
absolutely. And I think that is that the politics piece of things gets thrown out, I think, often as the where do we find the line kind of thing. And I'm really inspired to hear that connection between animals and people, the people side of the equation, is just as important as the animal side of the equation when we're talking about companion animals. So it's really exciting to know that
Yeah.
that's kind of happening in your organization. Um, I also wanted to know, just kind of despite the challenges of 2020 operationally, and just the mental emotional toll on everybody in the country at this point, what were ways that you could kind of or that you felt surprised? Were there silver linings that you felt came out of this past year of some difficulty that your organization was able to kind of springboard off of?
Sure. I think that one of the most beautiful parts of tragedy is that you get to see what really matters to people.
Mm.
And in the last year, with all of the superfluous things like events and parades and going to bars and going to restaurants, all that stuff kind of pushed out of the way or on temporary pause, we saw more people than ever showing up for our cause or for causes that they cared about. And whether that's through financial support or advocacy, I've always felt that the animal welfare field shows you the good in people more than it shows you the bad.
Yeah.
People a lot of times will say, like, oh, you work in animal welfare, you must hate people. But the people that I see the most are people who volunteer their time, who give money, who stop at the grocery store and pick up bleach for us on a Sunday. And more than ever, I mean, that held true in 2020 and into 2021, that we got to, again, like, see what matters to folks and see that supporting their community's animal shelter mattered to them very much when there was so much else to be focused on.
Yeah.
And then again, like you kind of mentioned, we've seen the animal welfare community come together across the whole country and even internationally. Now that we are all speaking to each other on Zoom, you're able to connect more easily with folks at other organizations that you never would have connected with in the past. So that's been very cool as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it makes it feel less, it makes it feel more organized as an industry too. Like
Mm-hmm.
we've referred to ourselves as a field or an industry, or I don't know what the proper term is for our
Yeah.
collective of shelters. But I think it often in the past felt like, okay, we're doing this. And I know, like, at a conference once I heard that other shelters were doing this, but how do I access like that person to say, like, hey, can you just walk me through like what what you did to implement that? And what I also think has been so inspiring is just I've never reached out to somebody in animal welfare and been like, can you help me understand like how you did this, or give me some advice. I've never had someone say no to that. And I
Yeah.
think that's another thing that I'm really inspired by, is just like the humanness of this field is often just so amazingly supportive, and I'm really glad that has benefited your organization as well. I also wanted to know, kind of, as you have been, things are starting to change, things are opening up a little bit, but even during the worst parts of quarantine, how are you finding new ways to connect with your community, and what have been some of the surprises maybe that you found about the ways that you can connect with the community?
This one kind of stumped me. Um, we have largely been relying on using our social media and our email and things like that to connect in pretty similar ways to how we would have in the past. We've just been using them a little more aggressively.
Yeah.
I think probably the best example of a new way that we are connecting is our lost and found page.
Mm.
So in the past, in order to make a lost or found pet report, you would have to come into our shelter, fill out a paper report, and then our staff would sort of keep track of any lost or found pets in the community as best they could. And certainly if we had a pet come into our shelter that matched a lost report, we would match them, back with their owner.
Mm-hmm.
But Diana actually created this very cool framework for our website where you can fill out a lost and found report and upload a picture to the website. And so folks that are in our community can use our website as a platform to communicate with each other about lost and found pets and kind of do the matching on their own.
Yeah.
And we have a team of volunteers that works remotely to contact people who have either lost or found pets to provide them with advice on moving forward. Here are some other approaches you can try. Here's some other resources that might be helpful to you. So we've really moved that reunification process, with the exception of pets that are in our shelter, completely off-site, which is not something I think we would have thought to do had we not been forced.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Have you started to see any kind of measurable impact of that? Have you seen any of those reunifications go up, or is it still kind of a little early to be able to tell?
It's still pretty new, and we're just kind of putting the finishing touches on our training process for our volunteers, but we have seen a few come through and reunite off just seeing, each other's pets on the page. So that's been very cool to see.
Yeah. Even the anecdotal stuff is good fuel, right?
Yeah.
For keeping it going. So we're getting to kind of the end of my questions, but what keeps you inspired? It doesn't have to be related to animal welfare, but just I think we all feel at one time or another that little bit of burnout, that little bit of even Zoom burnout at this point, I think is a very real thing. How do you stay inspired, and especially, really fueled to continue to, when we were talking about intersectionality, what are the things that really keep you going on that end of the spectrum?
Are you familiar with Human Animal Support Services through American Pets Alive?
Yes.
Yeah, I am in one of their working groups for program sustainability and animal welfare. And that working group has been tremendously motivating, not only because you get to see all these cool things that other shelters are doing across the country, but because it connects you with resources and people who are doing the same kind of work that we want to be doing, or that maybe are a little bit ahead of us. So it gives you something to chase. And that has been a very rewarding experience for me, and even my team members that have been in and out of my office and kind of overheard some of the content from the calls that I've been on have used those little seeds and gotten ideas of their own. So idea sharing has always been something that has been very motivating to me, because if somebody else is doing something, like, I want to know how I can get in on it, how my organization can take that and make it our own.
Absolutely. I am part of the communications and marketing.
Oh, great. Very appropriate.
Yeah. So I absolutely can relate to kind of that feeling of just knowing what is happening, I think can be a real door opener. So is there anything else that you would want us to know, either about the photography project, or just about Portsmouth Humane Society and kind of what the future looks like for your organization?
I think the only thing that I would add is that we are in a permanent state of learning, and we are always looking for more people to learn from, especially people who are in the kinds of communities that we want to provide more representation for. I certainly recognize, as both an individual and someone in a leadership position at an organization, that a big part of our job is elevating the voices of marginalized folks rather than just speaking over them. So certainly if anybody sees this and says, hey, here's something you could be doing better, or here's a way that you approach this and maybe you should do it a different way, we would love to have that feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so with you. I was watching the news this morning, and there was a piece that was about some revitalization that's happening in the Detroit community. And I was so happy that they made a point of saying that a huge part of the project was a listening period within the community, and that they didn't just go in with millions of dollars and say, we know how to tell you how to fix the community. They went in and asked first, what's the most important thing for us to know about any kind of community-based project. And I think that that's, to me, one of the most exciting next parts of animal welfare, is really diving into what does this look like as community led? What does it look like to really and truly pass the microphone to the people that should have it at this point? So
that's a great observation. And it's definitely something that we're trying to incorporate in our community support programming. Our shelters model has largely been focused on the traditional sheltering model, which is to provide care for the animals that we have on site. And as we branch out into doing more outreach and providing resources, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing is providing resources that people actually need and want. So getting feedback from our community is a really important component there, and doing a resource study for Portsmouth will be one of our next steps as we evaluate where we should be going with those kinds of programs.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm excited to watch everything that you're doing, Alison. This has been really An
I have
incredible
a very strong team, so I feel very privileged to work where I do.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being willing to do this and for everything that you're doing. I'm truly am excited to just follow along with what you guys are up to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for helping us distribute these images. I hope that they can be put to good use.